So we're going to cover five areas. We're going to cover watering. You get the water right, and you're most of the way there. Ground cover, kind of maintenance of grasses and mulches. We're going to talk about fertilization and compost. We're going to talk about pruning and disease control. So those are kind of our big five that we're going to cover. Start with the water. Water is the most important part. Where there's water, there's life. Most common reasons for fruit tree death: not enough water, too much water. Getting it just right is a good way to go. With the drip system that we've inserted. Let's see, do I have an example here? Yeah. Across each of the trees, we have this inline drip emitter tubing. If you look real close, you can see there's an emitter right in there. There's 4 of them across each tree. For the first years, you'll see we put little, what we affectionately call clippy things, little things that go into these holes on the emitter. They go to spaghetti tube, so that 1, 2, 3, 4 emitters are all dropping right at the base of the tree. So that's going to be four drippers on each tree. Each of these is pressure compensating, meaning that regardless if you're at the bottom or at the top of the hill, they're going to deliver the same amount of water. And it's about half a gallon per hour per emitter. So 1, 2, 3, 4, half a gallon per hour times 4, 2 gallons per hour per tree is what pops out of our little system. Come second year, you can just knock off those little clippy things. They kind of fall off on their own about 3/4 of a year through, so you might not have to do any work in that regard. And then you'll have a wider base of watering that's pouring on the trees. That setup will last you about 3 years. At which point we probably want to make a slightly larger ring of irrigation. But in this drought conditions, it's just good to go with what you need initially and then expand on there. So that's what we do in the schoolyards. We start with these little 4 systems, and then in year 2 or 3, we expand to bigger loops around the trees. So that's exciting. So 2 gallons an hour on the trees. For the first year, somewhere between 5 and 9 gallons a week is what the trees want. 5 gallons a week will certainly do the trick, and that's what's usually recommended. We find that when we up it more towards 9, that we get a little more vigor and growth in the first year. So the timer, which I worked with Larry on setting, we have it set for 2 times a week for about 2.5 hours each time. So that drops about a little bit less than 5 gallons each time it drops. And that'll be on Sunday, so that'll be watering when folks are in church, so they can, we decided to do that in case there was a break in the line, people would be there to see it. And then Thursday. So it's set for pretty much set for the first year. I showed Larry how to turn it off if suddenly we have a big rainy spring. You can just turn it off until the rains die down. Let's pray for that situation. And then each year you bump it up a little bit. The easiest way to tell that, well, there's a few different ways to tell that. I want to give a little formula that works well in California, just for everyone's knowledge. And then we also send out reminder newsletters every 2 months and I'll put a good number of you or all of you on that orchard care list. And every 2 months you'll get a Common Vision reminder. Here's the checklist of things to do in the orchard, and that helps keep people on track. But if you take the area of the canopy, so that's the radius squared times pi, you end up with the square footage of canopy. Turns out that's also the number of gallons a tree needs per week, more or less, in California. There's no rhyme or reason of why those two things ended up working out that way, but there's a big formula that you can do that I was working with the UC system. I was like, they had a lot of information, and every time I checked it, it was like, yep, it turns out that square footage of canopy equals number of gallons per week. And I was like, easy enough. So that's the rough thing. So if you have a 4-foot canopy, then you're talking about 2 squared 4 times pi, about 13 gallons per week, and then each year go out from there. What's that?
It would not work in me.
No, there's no reason why it particularly works out. It just does. So that means the first year you're talking about 5 gallons per 5 gallons. We're doing 9. On a mature tree, which in this case is going to be about 8 foot wide by about 8 foot tall, you're talking somewhere more like 40 gallons per week. On a mature, like a full-size mature tree, like 18 foot wide and 16 foot tall, you're talking more like 120 to 150 gallons per week for real optimal fruiting. It's a lot of water. But that's the game. Do you have a question, Larry?
You continue to do it twice a week, or do you give it a good soak once a week?
I find that in the first year I do it once a week, first year I do twice a week, and then I move to once a week. In this soil, I just afraid of putting too much water on at once. I kind of want to give it some more regular water and see if we can get it to absorb water more over time. Certain things will break up limestone, actually. If you get a fungal content that's rich enough in the soil, fungi actually is one of nature's ways of mining rock and loosening rock over time. But we're talking long time.
How do we tell if they're collecting too much water in the bottom of the pit? If you have a moisture meter somewhere in your garden club, that definitely will be an interesting thing to tell. Just do it after 4 days after irrigation, so maybe on Wednesday if it's doing it on Sunday, and just check the bottom and see if it's still fully moist down there. The bottom on some of these
is about 18 inches to 2 feet.
Little probes are only 6 inches.
You got to get the big probe.
Oh,
Or the probe that I usually use is a hanger. I just take a metal hanger and stick it on in there, and if
test
yeah,
the cake if anything sticks.
Exactly. And in this clay soil, you'll definitely get a dirty hanger if it's wet. So the hanger's the cheaper probe. That's what most of the schools use. But if anyone has one of the long probes around there, they can be real helpful. So that's water. Once a week, that's how I do all my fruit trees in my orchards and at home. It helps inspire deeper rooting trees. Here, I think it's a little bit unrealistic to expect these trees to get down much farther on their own very quickly anyway. So I think that balancing out with water twice a week is a good strategy here.
So you might do that for 2 years here, maybe?
Yeah.
Maybe so twice a week?
Yeah, it's really, I was showing Larry, it's really pretty easy to go between the two. It's one little setting, you can pick a day, and so I'd say either way is fine.
And if you make a mistake on the timer, you water every day?
Right, we learned that, yep.
So we have to watch for that?
So that's it on water. You get water right and you're stoked. The trees love that. As far as ground cover, kind of the understory of the orchard is an interesting little ecosystem. Here in California, generally we're balancing a lot of things. One is water usage. In this case, we're not dripping anywhere where the tree's roots are not. So it's not likely for the grass to take over too much. And you don't have really invasive grasses on the hillside, so that shouldn't be too much of a problem. In a lot of places, when you're dealing with Bermuda grass, that management becomes a lot more challenging. I was speaking to Elena a little bit earlier about some different orchard allies that can begin to be cultivated in the areas between the trees and beneath the trees. Some comfreys, some oreganos. Really, it's perennial woody herbs, like a lot of those Mediterranean herbs, just do fantastic in the orchard understory. They add a lot of beauty and fragrance, and they bring in some beneficial critters. And so I think over time that would be a great move. And I gave Elena a little bit of I gave Sheila a little bit of a plant list.
Okay.
One of my favorites of that is the comfrey, which. Oh yeah, but
Deep taproot.
so comfrey has a few beneficial pieces to it. One, it has deep taproot, so it is one of those creatures that's actually every one of them is gonna do a little bit more work in getting down into that sandstone.
you can't really kill the stuff, which for gardeners, veggie gardeners, you might think of it as the bane of your existence. In the orchard, we don't really care about that. In fact, it's one of the, it takes up a lot of space, about an area about this big. About 6 times a year, it'll put on about this much growth. Easiest thing to just take a machete or a little knife and just hack it right back to the ground and just push it right where you want it, mulch in place. And I have started working with a few different orchards where we actually develop thick, like 2 comfrey plant wide rows, kind of that delineate between the tractor rows in orchards, but in this case the alleys and the trees, such that you have all that green matter growing. Just hack it down like 6 times a season and just push it towards the tree row and just build soil right in the tree row. So it's one of my favorite little easy to maintain. Yep, and you just cut roots and you spread it. It's just almost all of these herbs spread by root cutting. So you can start with one little area, and we were talking with Sheila about picking an area to play around with these plants, and then actually start expanding it off into different areas. Dealing with irrigation and those things in establishment becomes a little bit more of a dance, and I'm happy to work through some different options that I've used. But anyhow, that's orchard understory. Keeping a good layer of mulch around the trees and around the root zone, highly recommended for 3 reasons. 1, weed suppression, keeps the weeds from getting a hold there. 2, water retention. We're in a drought, and that's a good idea to stay water retained. Also, for me, a lot of people just think of water not evaporating, but what I usually think about is soil microlife. And when you have sun baking directly on soil, the soil microlife doesn't live in that top layer where it's too hot. It has to kind of start an inch down. Whereas there's a lot of activity at that top layer, especially over here where the topsoil layer is about that thick. If you end up frying half of that with the sun, you have a much smaller amount of living space to work with. But if you have a nice cover of mulch over it, the soil surface becomes a temperature where microlife are stoked and the water stays around longer. So those fungi and bacteria and these different critters responsible for cycling nutrients live longer. And they'll actually break down the mulch over time, and that'll become good tree food. So if you think about it, fruit trees are trees. They're forest edge ecosystem creatures. They grew for millions of years with leaf duff and branches that are decomposing and then going back to the soil. That was their fertilizer forever. They're totally trained to work with the fungi and microlife to symbiotically feed themselves, break down the duff. So I don't know, it's a fun game. So so it's 1, water conservation, 2, weed suppression, 3, food for the trees. So every year, or probably every year, adding some more wood chips. Bigger, chunkier wood chips will last longer. We'll have less nutrient cycling, but there'll be less work over time. Mulch like this that's more broken down will need to get replaced every year, which is probably good here, building up topsoil that way. Because you're not fighting some really nasty grasses. So we've covered water. That's understory management. Fertilization, compost. This is not the richest soil that we've come across. And we put on some time release nutrient. We put on compost, some different, some kelp, some really humic rich granulated material that creates humic acid as the water falls in it. And then some pelletized guanos. So we gave quite a good, a bunch of that is for microlife inoculation, like the humic acids and the kelps really get the little microbes going nuts and growing. And then the nutrient stuff just helping give the trees some food. Would recommend giving them another feeding in probably early May. And probably for your first 3 years at least, giving them a little bit of a balanced NPK. We prefer organic fertilizer, something in the 444, 555 range. There's a few different options at garden stores for stuff like that. That's what I would recommend, hitting that twice a year. Beginning of growing season and then a little bit further into the growing season. It really gives them a good boost in the opening year. Once they get established, you can kind of get, often the decomposing compost, the compost and the decomposing mulch tend to do the trick. that's kind of it on the fertilizer tip. Any questions on that one? So that's water, understory management, fertilizer. Let's hop to disease control, and then pruning will actually hop out there and do a little imagination game and get in touch with our orchard in the next 10 years. Disease control, if you get water right and you pick varieties that are not disease susceptible, as we have, you shouldn't have to deal with much. I would say, looking at this orchard and thinking about this place, there's a few things that might come up. One is aphids, especially plums in the Bay Area. The aphids seem to love the plums. It doesn't happen in other areas that we've really worked as strong, but in the Bay Area, I know they love them. Aphids are farmed by ants, and so ants are really your target creature to deal with when you have aphid issues. And the way that you would deal with that is called tanglefoot, which is a sticky substance that you put around the trunk. You need to put some barrier because putting it directly on the trunk actually eats at the bark. So you put a little barrier down, you put some of this stuff right around the trunk, and then when the ants crawl up, they all get stuck. And if you have a big ant population, then you often need to change it out a few times a year. The pressure is probably not very strong here. You might not need it at all. Your plums and citrus will be your first to notice if you have aphid farming ants around. Let's see, another disease you might come across, peach leaf curl. I don't know, do we put in peaches and nectarines here? Oh, hi Fatima, how you doing? So it's unlikely that you're going to need to do anything in that department. Do any of you have peach or nectarine trees at home?
Yeah.
Familiar with how to take care of peach leaf curl issues?
I've been doing what you guys
The-
do,
the-
just pull the leaf off right when they open up and then try to make sure you get the ground underneath as clean as you can, which is impossible.
There's really, in places where there's strong pressure, it's a fungal disease. It sets in at bud break and gets systemic into the tree, and then the tree has it for that season. So once you see it, there's nothing you can do about it. You have to let the leaves fall. What's recommended is a sulfur copper and sulfur spray, which is a fungicide. Which, I mean, it is an antibiotic. Though it's organic certified, it kills life. You know, so I don't really love to use it, but it comes up 3 times a year. You do in the dormant season before they wake up, and that'll knock back the pressure.
So do you worry about the copper building up in the soil? Or?
No, not at that use, but it does. As far as the fungi are your friends, and they're as far as creating a biological system that really supports the trees, you're killing fungi in the soil every time you spray the copper, and it kind of lands on the soil and gets washed in. So it's not my favorite, but it's what I do for my peaches and nectarines because I haven't found a real solid biologic way to take care of it.
We knew somebody who recommended urine diluted with water. Have you ever run into that?
No, I'm open to trialing different things because I really don't like using copper and sulfur. Other diseases you might run into, we use all fire blight resistant varieties of pears, but if you don't have fire blight resistant varieties of pears, you might run into it. The Asian pears are somewhat susceptible, and I would say if you never see it, don't worry about it. And if you do see it, it looks like kind of like a burnt little branch. Usually if the pressure isn't too strong, you just cut 1 foot beneath where you see it. So if you see signs of it, go back to 1 foot, cut, and then wash your tools well. Either bleach or with we use alcohol for sterilization. And the pressure shouldn't be any stronger than that here, so we shouldn't run into needing to do any other preventatives. I think that's it on disease control. What we usually tell schools is if you notice any disease or pest, call us. And then we'll talk you through how to do it, and we'll send someone out if you need help. I mean, that's what we offer for the schools. But you have a lot of resources in your area to draw on for that too. But feel free to give me a call if you have questions. Pruning. I'll do it here and then we'll walk out there for a sec. Coddling moth for the apples, probably not for the pears, probably for the apples around here. Do you have you noticed that in your local apples a lot, the codling moth?
apple tree, so I don't know.
Anyone have an apple tree in there?
Well, sometimes.
Do you find it has a lot of worms in it? Yep. Yep. So you're blessed. Don't worry about it. If you're in Sacramento, I would say you're very unlikely to eat a codling moth-free apple in your life, and if you do, you're lucky. Codling moth in Sacramento has 5 breeding cycles. Usually, in most places, it's just three generations per year. They have 5, which exponentially increases numbers towards the end of the year when your apples are the ripest. It's really unfortunate, really hard to deal with. And it's not that easy to deal with that pest organically. I'm happy to talk to people. I don't want to bring it, because you guys don't have that issue, I won't bring you through the journey. But if you have codling moth questions, I've studied those beasts quite a bit. So let me give a little, so I like to go from patterns to details. And for pruning, I find that almost all pruning classes I've ever been to get too detail oriented, and then people stand in front of trees and scratch their head. So what I like to do is I like to give a picture of where we're headed and like kind of in the 5 and 10 year plan, and then that, for me, that gives a lot more empowerment of how I'm going to choose my cuts now. Our goal is to have trees that have low branching. So, do I need to hold this thing for this? I like to use my hands.
I'll hold it for you. Marilyn will be your mic
You could
speaker.
hold it here.
Oh,
Yeah, don't worry.
all right, we got it.
When I get tired, I'll give it to you.
So we have, as you see, we cut all the trees at about 18 to 20 inches to inspire low branching. Something to know about fruit trees is they have apical dominance. Most of these deciduous varieties have apical dominance, meaning that their top bud gets most of the juice by sending a hormone down to the rest of the tree saying, hey, you're not top dog, chill out. Reason for this evolutionarily is that fruit trees are forest edge ecosystem creatures, which are always in competition for light, for limited sunlight. And so they're almost all designed to shoot branches as high as they can to capture that light. Which we're providing them a different kind of environment. They really don't need to be worried about that. It's a old paradigm of competition that's not serving them or us. And so we're inspiring them to have a more even growth all the way around, thus limiting the effect of that apical dominance and getting more balanced and lower growth. You'll see in anyone who's ever grown apricots or peaches, you'll see every year you're kind of getting the fruit at farther and farther away from the tree, and you're like no longer have any leaves at the base, in this whole area here. First harvest is then 14 feet up. Our goal is an easy to manage low tree. So the general form of the tree is going to look something like 4 or 5 branches coming out from around that 1 to 2 foot range, coming out at about 45 degrees in this big open vase shape. And the open vase shape is nice because as the sun travels up and over the tree, it actually ripens the fruit all along here in the interior evenly. So it's a really good strategy for even ripening. And so the general form of the tree is going to look something like scaffold branches, which are your primary branches. I said there's about 4 or 5 of them, coming out about 18 inches to 2 feet and splitting. Then coming out about 18 inches to 2 feet and splitting again. And then you all are going to maintain the height of the tree no higher than is, I say like whoever's the tallest person, there shouldn't be a branch any higher than this. And what that does is that's going to help keep the trees in a way where the productivity is happening from about 3.5 feet to about 6.5 feet, 7 feet, which is going to be much nicer on this hillside. Having to break out ladders on this hillside seems like it's not going to be fun. So the height of the tree, this is your responsibility. We don't plant dwarf trees, with the exception of that citrus, which is a dwarf. We stopped planting dwarf trees about 6 years ago because dwarf is another way of saying not vigorous. And in a schoolyard, not vigorous means not surviving. So what we're interested in having a vigorous tree that we then maintain the height of. So the tree's height is your responsibility. That apple does not know that it's going to be a 10-foot tree, 8-foot to 10-foot tree here. It thinks that it's going to be an 18-foot tree. So it's your job to tell it otherwise, or it will continue to grow. So tree height is your responsibility, And there's a lot of nuance that you can add to it, but the way I like to say it is, if it's getting too high, cut it. End of story. No matter what time of year it is, if you have a tool near you, or you could go get it, and there's something too high, cut it. Done. Yeah.
And cut it where on the branch?
We'll cut it slightly below where you want it to grow, because it's going to grow up again. So
But
now,
I mean, is there a point? I mean, is it between buds? Is it-
yeah. So if you want to get more detailed, because the end bud of any branch is going to get the most juice. If you choose just about 1/4 inch above whichever bud, that's the one that's going to get, that direction is going to be where the next branch shoots off. But usually you end up with splitting usually, because the first 2 buds on that will end up popping. But definitely that top one is going to be your primary direction. Like I said, you can start getting into a lot of nuance. But what I love to do is move in the patterns, because I find that when people really get the sense of the patterns, then the details are all much more fun to work on.
All in place.
The first 2 years of growing the tree, really the entire purpose is to grow roots, which just happens naturally with photosynthetic activity going down to the roots. You know, trees budget about 80% of their energy on root growth. 80%. That's a lot. Fruit trees maybe 75%. Half of that is to grow roots. Half of that is actually to feed microorganisms, which is a whole nother lecture. But but they actually use a good 30% to 40% of their budget of energy to feed microorganisms and keep biology happening around them, because they need those microorganisms to be happy, to be digesting the food to create their own fertilizer. So that's ecosystem-wise. That's an interesting fact about trees. That there's a lot of millions of years of investment in that a symbiotic relationship. So, but I definitely am. That's a whole different topic. First 2 years to 3 years, we're doing roots and primary structure. And I give that pattern. You know, the tree is never going to grow perfectly to that pattern, right? The one that I just gave. But that's the general form of, with the exception of the pomegranate and the citrus, all the trees are going to take that general form. And so you're going to be nursing these trees along. They're going to be branching out in the next 2 months, probably 3, 4, some of them 6, maybe some of the plums 8 branches, and shooting on up. What's really nice is if you know this pattern, right? That you want to get about 5 branches going out, and you're excited about all those leaves doing their root growth. So this is a little dance that we do. It's like, these 5 branches are the ones that I actually want for the long term, and you can start taking a little bit more of a, like they're like your favorite kids, like that you like really want to raise up. They're like they're yours, and so you can just watch them, and you can do different things to them. Like, for example, on the pears love to shoot straight up. And anyone that's grown a pear tree, it's like hard to get it to fill up much space. It just tends to be like, you end up with like 5 branches all like this. When they're young shoots, you can take those branches and just tie them over with a little string to the ground and stake them. And you can just choose your 5 branches, and you can start moving them out. And you can start making the angles what you want. But what I'll do a lot in my own orchard is with the pears, I'll just take a toothpick and just stick it in there when they have the little branches. And you can't do that on a 1-year-old branch or a 5-year-old branch by any stretch. But you can really make the shape more what you want. And so I find, especially the pears and some apples like to go really vertical, and I have to give them all a little bit of outward. And then if I have a lot of growth in that first year, I'll even just cut out some of the stuff in the middle that's growing straight up. Because ultimately, once the dormant season comes, I'm going to cut that out anyway, because I want that open vase shape. The other thing I'll do is, if I have enough vigor, let's say it's July, and I'm out there in the orchard, and my plums now have 5-foot shoots, which happens sometimes. Anyone that's grown plums, they can really go for it. If you go ahead and go 2 feet and give them all a little cut, those branches that you really want, they'll split. And then you've already created, by next dormant season, you'll have going about 18 inches and splitting. And then you'll be able to just kind of work from there, and you've already started your structure Or if you wait all the way until next dormant season, you'll cut those at about 18 inches to 24 inches, and then they'll they'll split. But you actually gain, like, you get like 2 seasons worth of adventures if you cut them mid-season and get them just right. So I like to think of that general pattern of, like, what are my scaffold branches, and just think of like this whole tree organism growing roots and growing scaffold branches, and the rest of it is just kind of other photosynthetic activities supporting those 2 things. If fruit comes on in the first years, I usually just pick it off in the first 3 years, because I'm really interested in getting the roots really well established. So a little plum is going to take a lot of juice out of that little tree, and so I'd rather just knock that off and get my branching right.
So for 3 years, pick off all the fruit.
That's what I do.
Say something about citrus too, because he says it's different.
Citrus is a little. In the case of this dwarf citrus, you need to do almost nothing. Fertilizing, citrus likes more nitrogen than everything else here, so adding a little bit of nitrogen fertilizer twice, just adding that into the mix when you're feeding the rest of the trees, it's going to keep it green. You'll definitely notice with the citrus that their leaves will yellow a little bit if they're not getting that food. They feed a little heavier. But as far as pruning on that citrus, you're really just making sure that any low branches that are close to the ground, like anything, once it grows up a little bigger, anything a foot off the ground should just be cleared. It's called clearing the skirt of the orange tree. That also works because, like I said, if ants pop around, ants do love to climb on the citrus trees and farm whatever the heck they're going to farm, scales and aphids. And if you have leaves on the ground, you do that tanglefoot strategy. They just crawl up the leaves elsewhere. So keep that skirt up. It keeps airflow, keeps disease away. And I mean, you don't have to do much for a whole bunch of years. Eventually, you might need to do a little work in clearing out some extra matter if it gets too thick in a certain area. Leave it in 10. But that's kind of it on the citrus. On the dwarf citrus, it's just size control. If it goes a little higher than you want, you just kind of cut it back. Done. Pruning wise, I think that's it. I mean, there's a lot to pruning. There's a lot of how to do like exact cuts. A lot of that stuff. I think there's probably knowledge in this. Awesome. So there's a lot of knowledge here for all the basics of pruning, but I find that pattern thinking is often what's missing from a pruning class, and I think that's probably the biggest knowledge. And the 2 things that I want you to remember is in the first 2 to 3 years, you're building scaffold branches, open base shape, general form, and secondly, size control, your responsibility. It gets too tall, cut it.
With a mature tree, one, let's say a 5-year-old tree or an 8-year-old tree, can you prune out the center if nothing has been done to it?
What kind of tree is it?
A plum.
Heck yeah.
And what about any other fruit? Any sensitivities by,
I mean, if it's
open it up?
If it's an apricot or a cherry, you want to be a little careful about cutting it in the wet season because they can get disease that way. But generally, we do that a lot. We come to a lot of overgrown orchards, both in schoolyards and otherwise, and we do a lot of radical cuts that kind of make people somewhat queasy, maybe even angry.
So you prune out the top.
Prune out the middle.
Yeah,
and it's usually like a big branch, a big trunk around here that you just slice off and then inspire the growth other ways. When you cut in the dormant season, you inspire vigor. So if you think about the tree has stored up 100 units of energy down below the surface to put out into 100 units of foliage up above, and you cut off half of that, and suddenly it has half of the places to put all that energy when it pushes its growth. So you get longer whips of growth out of the areas that you cut. So if you want to renew a tree, cutting that middle and giving a big vigorous push.
You do that in the dormant.
You do that in the dormant season often. Almond, same thing as the other stone fruit, so it's open center, same general form. Leo, you've worked with pomegranates a lot. How do you usually do the pomegranate pruning?
There's a couple different ways to do them. I'd recommend growing them on a single stem. Some people grow them on like a 3 to 5 stem system.
Okay.
But a single stem system will just make it easiest to manage. You can essentially apply all of the same rules that you're applying to the rest of the orchard to them that way, and your management doesn't have to change from tree to tree as much. So I'd prune them out so that you have a good, at least a 12-inch clear at the bottom, and then just like everything else, pick 3 to 4 to 5 main scaffold branches over the next year and run with them.
And the same with the figs?
Yep, same with the figs.